want to welcome you this gorgeous Sunday afternoon to our author talk of Wendy McClure. I know most of you are probably in a pioneer mode, and this won't apply to you, but for those of you modernists, if you would silence your electronic devices so that we don't have any interesting bell tone rings during the talk. One of the most important aspects of this particular library museum is that it is located within distance of Herbert Hoover's actual birthplace home. So the power of place is very important in understanding the Hoover story. And it's clearly important for Laura Ingalls Wilder and for those who want to follow that adventure. So I think it's very important or appropriate to have this talk, not only because we have Rose Wilder Lane's papers here and some of the manuscripts of her mother, but also that connection with place. I've not read any of the Little House books, and when I was reading Wendy's book, this passage struck me. Boys in these early books rank about the same level as bears. Obviously not as dangerous, but like bears, their exploits make for swell anecdotes once in a while, the sort of story that invariably ends with a good whipping. Now about the author. Wendy McClure is an author columnist for Bust magazine, which is breaking through and busting stereotypes. There may be a double entendre there as well. And a children's book editor. Her essays have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, the Chicago Sun-Times, and in a number of anthologies, including Love is a Four-Letter Word, Feed Me, and Sleepaway, Writings on Summer Camp. In addition, she's contributed to the radio show Writer's Block Party on NPR, NPR station WBEZ in Chicago, and has spoken at conferences for Blog Her and American Society of Journalists and Authors, and for literary events at the Chicago Tribune, Printers Row Book Festival, and Story Studio Chicago. She has a master's in fine arts in poetry from the Iowa Writers Workshop. Her 2005 memoir, I'm Not the New Me, was featured in publications such as Time Magazine, USA Today, Elle, and the San Francisco Chronicle. It was based in part on her weblog, Pound, which she first began in 2000 to write about body image issues and to make fun of aerobics instructors, and has been featured in Glamour and other magazines. Her infamous online collection of vintage Weight Watcher recipe cards and commentary was published in the 2006 humor book, The Amazing Macro Pudding Plan. Her new book is the one she's talking about today, The Wilder Life, My Adventures in the Lost World of Little House on the Prairie. Wendy is a part-time senior editor at Albert Whitman and Company, where she's edited over 50 novels and picture books for children and has written and ghostwritten a few of her own. She has been a speaker and visiting editor at a number of Society for Children's Books Writers and Illustrators conferences around the country. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Wendy McClure.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me okay? Great. I just noticed when I carried this in that my husband Chris was looking like wondering if I got another butter churn. No, this is Mary's. I already have two. So, but that's kind of what the turn my life has taken in the past couple of years. I am going to start out with reading a little bit from my book, The Wilder Life, just a little bit of an introduction, so you can get a sense of how it was I became a person who now owns 2 butter churns. And then after talking for a little bit, I will be taking some questions. But I want to make sure everyone hears me okay? Okay.
Not as well as before.
What?
Not as well.
Not as well as before. Okay. Let me see if this is, I'm going to set it a little higher. How about this? Is this better? Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit, read from the book, and then show you some pictures, which is essentially what I did at my Laura Ingalls Wilder vacation. First, starting out, the opening chapter from the book, just to get you in the right state of mind. I was born in 1867 in a log cabin in Wisconsin, and maybe you were too. We lived with our family in the big woods, and then we all traveled in a covered wagon to Indian Territory, where Pa built us another house, out on high land where the prairie grasses swayed, right? We remember the strangest things, the way rabbits and wild hens and snakes raced past the cabin to escape a prairie fire, or else how it felt when the head of a needle slipped through a hole in the thimble and stuck us hard, and we wanted to yell, but we didn't. We moved on to Minnesota, then South Dakota. I swear to God it's true, we were a girl named Laura, who lived and grew up and grew old and passed on, and then she became a part of us somehow. She existed fully formed in our heads, her memories swimming around in our brains with our own. Or that's how it felt to me, at least. That's how it still feels sometimes, if I really think about it. It's just how reading the Little House books was for me as a kid. They gave me the uncanny sense that I'd experienced everything she had, that I had nearly drowned in the same flooded creek, endured the grasshopper plague of 1875, and lived through the hard winter. It's a classic childhood delusion, I know, and in my typically dippy way, I tended to believe that the fantasy was mine alone, and this magical past life business was between Laura and me and no one else. Surely I was the only one who had this profound mind meld with her that allowed me to feel her phantom pigtails tugging at my scalp. I had to be the only one who was into the books that much. Obviously, that's not true. Most of the Little House books I read came from the public library. I remember studying the list of the books in the series. Their titles appeared in small caps in the front matter of every book, and I loved the way the list had its own rhythm. Little House in the Big Woods, Little House on the Prairie, Farmer Boy, On the Banks of Plum Creek, By the Shores of Silver Lake, The Long Winter. Of course I memorized them. Little Town on the Prairie, These Happy Golden Years, The First 4 Years. The words plodded along reliably, like the feet of Indian ponies. And oh my God, I wanted to live in one room with my whole family, and have a pathetic corncob doll all my own. I wanted to wear a calico sunbonnet, or rather, I wanted to not wear a calico sunbonnet, the way Laura did, letting it hang down her back by its ties. I wanted to do chores because of those books. Carry water, churn butter, make head cheese. I wanted dead rabbits brought home for supper. I wanted to go out in the backyard and just, I don't know, grab stuff off trees, or uproot things from the ground, and bring it all inside in a basket, and have my parents say, "My land, what a harvest!" There were a host of other things from the books that I remember I wanted to do too, such as make candy by pouring syrup in the snow, make bullets by pouring lead, sew a seam with tiny and perfectly straight stitches, have a man's hand span my corseted waist, which at the time didn't seem creepy at all. Twist hay to sticks, eat salt pork, eat fat pork, keep a suckling pig as a pet, chase a horse or ox into a barn stall, ride on the back of a pony just by hanging onto its mane, feel the Chinook wind. So that was my state of mind when I was a kid, when I read the books. As it happened, I didn't really return to the books again for a very long time, for more than 30 years. I'm a children's book editor, so I don't know why, but I think partly it's because I look at things with so much of an editor's eye that I was afraid that the books wouldn't be as good as I remembered. But all that changed a few years ago when my parents were moving across the country and they were having a garage sale, and I came across a box of children's books. And I know I mentioned before that I read most of the books from the public library, so I didn't think I had that sort of beloved set that a lot of you I know have, that you read again year after year. But as it turned out, way back in the day, I did own this one little battered copy of Little House in the Good Woods. And this isn't even my name on the inside. I don't know where this came from, but I know I read it, and that's how it started 30 years ago. And then 30 years later, that's how it started again, because I reread the books for the first time, and it was just really just kind of a revelation. So I became kind of obsessed. So, so when I say, my adventures in the lost world of Little House on the Prairie, you do know I mean this Little House on the Prairie, and not this Little House on the Prairie. So, nothing against the TV show. I never actually really watched it when I was a kid. I have gone back and I've watched it a little bit now, but really my love was with the books. As you know, this is Laura Ingalls Wilder around the time that she wrote the Little House books. And then this is her daughter, Rose Wilder Lane, who, as you heard, her papers are here at the Hoover, and with them her mother's papers. So that is part of the connection here. And she also helped her mother a great deal in writing the books. This is me around the time I was reading the books. This is camping in Illinois, and this was sort of my own sort of version of Plum Creek in the background that I love to play in. My hair is as long as it would ever be. I really wanted it to be long enough to braid into pigtails, but I couldn't really bring that off. Around the same time, I was in a production of A Christmas Carol. That's me front and center. It was my stage debut. I got to be on stage, but that wasn't nearly as thrilling as something else I got to do. And I wonder if you guys can guess what it is.
The fur muff.
What?
The fur muff.
Well, the fur muff, yes. Well, actually, that's another girl, but I got to have the fur muff the next year. This is sort of me front and center with the red dress and the shawl, and I'm wearing a bonnet. And that was incredibly thrilling, even more so than getting to go on stage. And then I was in the same production the next year, and then my costume included the fur muff, and that was awesome. Let's see. So, and then this is my set of books that I began to read a few years ago. After I read through this copy, and was telling my now husband Chris how great the books were, how great this book was. He happened to find a copy of the blue set. I'm still looking for a yellow set, but he brought back the blue set of books. And I remember at the time I thought, well, that's nice, I'll get to those eventually. No, I read through them all, one after the other, in the course of a summer. I just devoured them, and that's when I really became obsessed. I remember taking a copy of On the Banks of Plum Creek with me to a conference in Anaheim, California, and Disneyland was within walking distance, and the only place I wanted to be was in Minnesota in the 19th century. So that's when I knew I had to do something. So it's when I wanted to sort of enter the world of the books. So one of the things I did to start out with was some hands-on activities. As you know, that's a really big part of Little House books. I remember looking at this as a kid and really wanting to do that. And so in time I bought my own butter churn and got to do just that. I was really disappointed that the butter churn wasn't as tall as I am, like it was with Mary, but that's okay. So I took whipping cream, and this is what the butter looks like after you take it out of the churn. I was a little surprised, but to find out that it tasted exactly like the butter you get at the supermarket, because I was using supermarket cream. I was also under the impression that churning took a really long time, and I remember thinking I was going to have to spend a whole day just doing this. When in reality, if the cream is at the right temperature, it takes about 20-25 minutes. maybe even less, depending on the amount. So, so that was fun. Let's see. I really have to thank Barbara Walker and the Little House Cookbook for guiding me through making a lot of the other foods from the Little House books. If it weren't for her, I think I would have been very lost. Does anyone know what this is? Snow candy. Yeah, it didn't turn out so well for me. I liked it, but I think I like regular candy better. But cans of snow. I felt, in my case, I'll have to try it again, maybe with a real candy thermometer. But I found that the candy stuck better to everything. It cooled better on everything except the snow. The counter, everything. But I still enjoyed that. I had to do that. This is cooking up salt pork, parboiling it in a pan, and we cooked that up. A little salt pork goes a long way, as we found. It's very chewy and dense, and I cooked up a whole sort of prairie dinner one night, and including salt pork and gravy, apples and onions, buttermilk biscuits, and my husband ate it, and he said, this is the kind of food that is good after a day in the fields, not after transferring from the old Yahoo mail to the new, importing all your email, which is what he'd been doing. And we kind of needed a nap afterwards. So anyway, those were the buttermilk biscuits. They were good. And then this is, let's see, this might be something a little interactive. If I could have a volunteer come up and help me. Do both of you want to come up and take turns? Okay. This is for making the bread that they had in the long winter. And yeah, come up here. All right. So I'm going to hold this down, and if you could just turn the grinder and help grind the seed wheat into flour. Is it hard? Kind of like grinding a great big pencil, isn't it? Sharpening it, yeah. All right, thank you. Is your arm tired? Here, I'll hold it down. Doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. Thank you. Yay! Thank you for doing chores. So this is seed wheat, which was part of the only provisions that the Ingalls family had during the long winter, in the book The Long Winter, and the only thing they could really do with it, I think they boiled it, they did some other things, but one thing they did is they used a coffee grinder to grind it into flour, which you can see is forming in the little drawer here, and they used that to make bread. And so you kids could see how hard it was to turn it. They had to do that every day. So it took an awful lot of sitting around and grinding that, and we got to sit in front of the TV and do that. So anyway, this is the bread that we produced from that. It did taste very good, but it was a lot of work. Let's see. These are vanity cakes that, as you know from the book On the Banks of Plum Creek, and they're supposed to be really light and airy. I kind of thought they were like the Krispy Kremes of the prairie. So it involves frying dough, and you cook them in about 2 pounds of lard. and the apartment smelled like a state fair. I don't think no one really knows if they have the right recipe for vanity cakes. It is some sort of fried dough recipe, and I don't feel like I came even close to mastering what Ma had done, but I definitely wanted to try. This is parched corn, like the corn that they had at Thanksgiving. They would have a couple of grains of parched corn by their plates to represent all that the Pilgrims had at Thanksgiving. And this was surprisingly good. You take dried corn and you cook it up in some butter or oil in a pan until it sort of puffs up. And some of it even pops a little bit. But you have that, and you can salt it or add brown sugar, and it's really good. This is a pie in the middle of making it. This is a green pumpkin pie that I made from, a green pumpkin. In the city of Chicago, it's kind of hard to find a green pumpkin. So what I did is I had to go to the local farmer's market in long about September and start asking people if they would bring me a green pumpkin and sell it to me. And so then they said they had to tell me just keep coming back until the green pumpkins showed up. And so finally one morning I went and there was a green pumpkin, and I brought it back with me on the L train. So doing all this stuff in the city was a little bit of a challenge. Let's see what else. We also went out to a living history farm where they had a sugaring time, so we learned how to tap maple trees and see how that worked. This is something that I think I will pass around. This is something that a reader of the book, a retired machinist in Minnesota, sent me. He makes these buckets that are sort of exact replicas of the cedar buckets used during the sugaring time in Little House in the Big Woods. And everything is made just with pegs and all the old time materials. And he said, "Do you want a cedar bucket?" And I said, "Sure." So I'll pass this around so you guys can look at it. I figured since so much of the book was doing hands-on stuff, that I wanted to give you a chance to do some hands-on stuff as well. Let's see. Now this is the second part, Entering the World of the Books, Part 2, Road Trip. I went on a series of road trips in order to see the Little House sites. Now this is a sign that you'll see at a lot of the home sites detailing Laura's travels. If you're familiar with the books, it seems as if they start out in Wisconsin and just sort of gradually move west. In reality, as you can see from this map, it's actually a lot more complicated. They were in Pepin, Wisconsin, and then when Laura was just a toddler is when they moved down to Independence, Kansas, which differs a little bit from the account in the book Little House on the Prairie. But they were there for a little over a year, and then they actually returned to Pepin, Wisconsin, because the owner, the person who had bought the log cabin, couldn't pay for it. So they decided to go back and reclaim that property. So they returned to Pepin, Wisconsin. So when you read the events of the novel Little House in the Big Woods, it's actually kind of covers more that second time that they lived in Pepin, Wisconsin. From there, they moved to Walnut Grove, Minnesota. And then from there, they actually moved back east for a little while to Burr Oak, Iowa. They also lived a little bit in Minnesota. So it wasn't really quite the straight shot west. There was a little bit of backtracking. They moved on from Minnesota to DeSmet, South Dakota. And then when Laura was an adult, she and her daughter Rose and her husband Almanzo moved down to Mansfield, Missouri. So that's sort of the typical trip. And so I visited lots of these sites. This is the replica log cabin in Pepin, Wisconsin. So where Little House in the Big Woods took place. I don't think this is the exact spot where the cabin stood, but you can get a sense of what it was like. We went in late March, which is a really interesting time to go. This is the Little House on the Prairie, again, a replica cabin in near Independence, Kansas. And so you can see a little bit about how they lived. After that, this is Walnut Grove, Minnesota, which you may not have heard the words Walnut Grove in the books because the name of the town was never mentioned, but it's the town in the book on the banks of Plum Creek. Most people know Walnut Grove from the TV show because that's where the TV show was set, even though the show was shot in California. Let's see. Then from there is DeSmet, South Dakota, also known as a little town prairie. And the last several books in the series take place there. And then another home site that is also mentioned in the books is in near Malone, New York. And this is the Farmer Boy house. This is a really great house because it is the only house mentioned in the books that still exists on its original foundations. And it's a wonderful historical reproduction, restoration. This is a site that's not mentioned in the books, but if you are going on sort of a Laura pilgrimage, it's worth stopping. It's this is the Methodist Church in Spring Valley, Minnesota. And this is where Laura's in-laws lived after they moved from this house. They eventually moved west to Spring Valley, Minnesota. So in case you were wondering how it was that Almanzo came all that way from where he lived in Farmer Boy to South Dakota, it was because his family had moved to Spring Valley, Minnesota. And in the sort of early years of their married life, when things weren't going so well for them, Laura and Almanzo and Rose stayed with his family in Spring Valley, Minnesota. There really isn't anything left of the Wilder farm except a barn, but you can go to this church and see the museum and see a lot of great old photos. This is one of my favorite sites, and there's some applause because this is in Iowa. I knew I wanted to go travel when I heard about this place. This is what some people sort of consider the lost Laura site, and this is the site of the hotel in Burr Oak, Iowa, where the Ingalls family lived and helped run this hotel in the years in between the books on the banks of Plum Creek and by the shores of Silver Lake. So this is another place. And if you are making sort of the circuit of trips around the Midwest to see the home sites, you definitely want to stop here. And then there's this place, Mansfield, Missouri. This is Rocky Ridge Farm, and this is where Laura and Almanzo lived for most of their adult life after they moved down to Missouri, and it's where she wrote the books. And now it's a really gorgeous museum. And I did a little extra things. I was in New York, and so I decided to stop by an apartment building where Rose lived for a number, I think one winter where the building wasn't heated, but she sat at her typewriter and typed away. Anyway, that building's still standing. So any place where I could get to, basically, I went to see where they had lived. I went to see it. This was the reason why I was really glad to see Pepin, Wisconsin in early March, because this is Lake Pepin, and it's still frozen, and it's where it's this ice that the Ingalls family drove over in the very beginning of Little House on the Prairie. So they drove that whole distance over ice around the same time of year. And I think at this point the ice is still about 2 feet thick, even though it's as late as March. But it was really something, and I really sort of felt like if I could just walk across that lake and then just sort of wind up in in the world of Little House on the Prairie. I didn't try it, but this is a sod house. This is part of a wonderful exhibit that's actually just outside Walnut Grove, Minnesota, and it is known as the Sod House on the Prairie site. These are not historical buildings. They're actually reproductions using old sod house building techniques. But it really does give you a sense of what it was like to live out on the Minnesota prairie. And it was a gorgeous place. Also, just even though a lot of the places are reconstructed cabins and you don't get to see the original house, or houses where Laura lived, the landscape is still very much the same. So one of my favorite things about going on this trip was seeing the prairies in 3 different states. So there's prairie, more prairie, more prairie, prairie in Kansas, prairie in Minnesota. And then this is where the dugout in the book On the Banks of Plum Creek stood. It's now caved in, but you can visit and see the indentation in the ground. But otherwise, the site is very much the same. The trees are grown up a little bit more, but the creek is still there. You can put your feet in it. I did that. It's still very clear. This was our attempt at twisting a hay stick, like the sticks they twisted for fuel in the long winter. You can do this at Ingalls Homestead in DeSmet, South Dakota. And you have to twist a lot harder than this, apparently, to make something that you want to burn. Let's see. I'm really glad that I grew up with Barbies and not corncob dolls, but this is one I got. I named it Claudia. I went to see the Laura pageants. There are 2 in the Midwest, or the upper Midwest. There's this is the one at Walnut Grove, which is very impressive, with live animals and pyrotechnics and all kinds of things. And then here is the one in DeSmet, South Dakota, and this is a production of The Long Winter, and it has a special guest. I don't know if you can guess who it is. Enjoyed that very much. So, various things I learned. I learned really what close quarters the Ingalls family lived in. This is their room in the hotel in Burr Oak, Iowa. And this was one of the rare times where I could see the actual living space where they had lived. And a family of 5 lived in this room. And I don't know if you can tell, but the room is not much bigger than the bed. There's just a little space in the wall behind the bed, and then the head of the bed is just beyond the borders of that picture. I'm not even standing in the room, and you can see how small it is. And a family of 5 lived there. This is another place where they lived. This is the surveyor's house in DeSmet, South Dakota. And when you read the description in the book, it sounds like a really big house. And it was, I guess it would be if you were used to living in a room this size. But as from a modern perspective, it was really something to see the actual size of these places. Let's see. I also learned this is the lineup for the Laura and Nellie Lookalike contest in Walnut Grove during the family festival. All the little girls in Laura costumes lined up, and I learned that dozens and dozens of girls line up to compete in the Laura pageant. There are only a couple of Nellies. I like the Nellies, the few, the crowd. It was always really, this takes place in the middle of July. It's really hot, and their curls are kind of wilting, but bless their hearts. Let's see. I also learned that El Manzo is very good looking. Take a look at that. And then this is downtown DeSmet. And what we loved about being out here, things from the books really start to make sense once you go to see the places. I remember reading The Long Winter and wondering how it was that they could get lost in a blizzard just going across the street. And I think in here you get a sense because the streets were pretty wide. But also, I would probably even also get a sense if I experienced a Dakota blizzard, which I've not gotten a chance to, but I hope to sometime. Let's see, this is Ingalls Homestead. This is, again, over here is a reproduction of the homestead shanty over on the left, where the Ingalls family lived. So it gives you a sense of what it's like. Chris and I stayed out here in a sort of a covered wagon, sort of a sheep herder wagon where you could camp out. And there was a hailstorm, a really dramatic hailstorm the night we spent in the wagon. And we really worried about the wheat crop that they had out, that they have growing on the homestead site. Reproduction of the cabin. And here I really sort of felt like I'd really entered the world of the books. One big thing that I found out about doing all this, people were sort of asking me, aren't you worried that you're going to see too much and that the world of the books that you loved, if you find out the truth behind it, that it's not going to be the same, that you're going to be disappointed? I was not disappointed. Even though, you know, you find out things, Silver Lake isn't quite what it used to be. It's now behind a cement plant and it's really kind of dried up. I found that everything I saw still, the world of the books as I remember them, it still exists. And it only just sort of served to just really deepen my love. And it's looking at pictures of this where I realize I'm really glad I got to go. These are some of the cottonwood trees that Pa planted on the homestead property. And you can see how big they are now. Another thing that was really interesting about going to the sites is really being there. In the 1940s, Garth Williams, who illustrated the series, went on a similar road trip to mine in which he went around to see all the sites. And when you look at a lot of the pictures, you sort of wonder, he could have just drawn stuff from photos. He could have just done research and looked at old photographs. But I think there's just something about the sense that he was really there, standing in very much the same places, that he still really captures them in the art. So this is the lake that you see in the background of these happy golden years. And then this is the hill where Laura and Almanzo had their homestead in the book, The First 4 Years. And you can drive right off the road and pull over and take a look at it. And then you can see from the book cover that it's very much the same place. And this is a marker showing where the homestead site for the Ingalls family is in South Dakota. And that's what I did on my Laura Ingalls Wilder vacation. So that's where the talk part ends, but all these places and more are part of the book. But thank you very much.